Welcome to Sir David Simmons, His Life in Focus. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. Sir David ended last week's program by speaking about the conditions in Barbados during the early 1990s. This week, he picks up the discussion in early 1994, and he takes us on an exciting journey. You will learn of how he used his skills at legislative drafting to draft a motion, and the success of that motion changed the course of history of Barbados forever.
I have to say that as close as Owen Arthur and I were to each other, I mean, Owen would be here 2-3 times a week, and as I said, we would speak with each other on the mornings early. I never knew what was happening. No. Owen was, by now he had become leader around 93. He became leader of the Barbados Labour Party. And he had a leg into the Democratic Labour Party government, and we didn't know. And one Saturday morning, he called me and said, David, I want to meet me at Labour Party headquarters, 9:30. I said, why? I wanted to draft something. I said, okay, I'll come. So I went down, and when I got there, he said to me, I wanted to draft a no confidence motion against Sandy and the government. I'm going to move a no confidence motion. I said, but when we ain't got the numbers, we don't have the numbers, man. He said, I'll never forget this. He said, there's something you will learn about me. I do not ever do anything in vain, David Simmons. Draft. And I drafted the thing. And in those days, you had to have the resolution or motion or whatever it was handed in to the Clerk of Parliament. I think it was by 11 o'clock on the Saturday morning. I drafted it, touched it up, we went through, went and handed it in. And date was set for the no confidence motion. I didn't know where we were going to get these votes from because the Dems had the majority in the House. Well, when the Speaker called for the vote, Reyes and Evelyn Gray, Keith Simmons, might have been somebody else, all voted with her. I could not believe it. When that was a bloodless coup that Owen Arthur had staged, and it was so well concealed that even his closest friends didn't know what was happening and that it would succeed. Because I felt, well, you know, this is going to be a little bit of a harassment for them, but nothing more. I didn't believe that we'd have succeeded, but as I said, Owen knew what he was doing behind the scenes and kept the secret to himself very well. Yep. So then that paved the way for the general election of September 1994, September 2nd, I think it was, 1994. And Labour Party won, and I was made Attorney General and Minister of Home Affairs. And I was now looking forward to a good run because, as I said on a previous occasion, that was 85 after the by-election in St. Thomas, and by 86, the general election, and we were skedaddled and thrown out. So now in 94, I had the opportunity to plan the implementation of the law and order aspects of the manifesto. I used to write that part of the manifesto from 1976. And You know, I was able to do a number of the things that we promised to do in the manifesto. And as I have said elsewhere, I was able to make a change in the penal system that focused more on community punishment than lick and lock up and what we had in colonial days. And so we were able to bring in 1998 the Penal System Reform Act that now has a range of punishments from absolute and conditional discharges, curfew orders, community service orders, and all these various things. And the idea being that prison, custodial sentences are to be seen as the last resort, not the first, the last resort. And so that happened, and it gave me a chance also to look at how we could implement concepts of rehabilitation. One was easy, and that was providing for the deletion of convictions. And we created then the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, which gave you a second chance if you'd been convicted for some offense before. Murder was not included, but most other offenses, and you had, as it were, gone clean for 5, 7 years, whatever it was. After that, your record would be expunged, your criminal record. And that was important in terms of rehabilitation because it gave a number of people the opportunity not to be tainted by a criminal conviction and have it operate to your disadvantage, like stopping you from going, let us say, to the States. Because once you had a conviction, and the embassy was reluctant to give you a visa to travel. So there was that, and then in the prison, we started our rehabilitation programs. We started with 2 rehabilitation officers because, you know, funds were right after all that happened in '94. We barely escaped the evaluation and so on in '92. But there was not a lot of money in the early years of the ONAFA administration, so we had to be careful. We started with Pastor Baird, Lucille Baird. Lucille was one, and Daphne Jiggets. And they went in the prison and worked with prisoners. You know, Daphne had such a good program going in art that the prisoners were able to put on exhibitions in the park. And some got their work, were able to sell their work and accumulate that money to help when they left prison. And some of that work went as far as England. Oh yeah. So it started. There were a number of prisoners who responded. There were some, but there was one, certainly, who refused to be rehabilitated. The famous Harding. I remember Pastor Baird asked to see me one afternoon, and she came. And she was reporting to me on how they were doing with the programs and what more they needed, any more help they needed, and so on. And she told me, you know, I've been working on the blocks and going down, even in maximum security. And the response has been good, except Alfred Harding, who looked her straight in the eyes and said, you can't do anything for me, so don't worry to try. But he ended up dead in St. Lucia. But, he was just incorrigible. So we got a number of things done in '94. Physical things like upgrades of, between '94 and 2001 when I retired, I better say. But everything that happened in '94, of course. I thought that I should set out a program for refurbishment of police stations. It was important that the criminal element should not be able to look askance at the condition of a police station and feel that police are working in substandard conditions and so on. Psychologically, for me, it was important that the conditions under which police operated should be upgraded to try and convey, if not instill, at least convey to the criminal element and others that this was a respectable institution operating in decent and commodious surroundings. So, number of stations were done, starting with Central. That whole Central police station, gutted it and rebuilt and gave the officers proper offices and so on. And, there are a number of things that you can find. I suppose that there are two initiatives of which I am quite proud. One was the National Task Force on Crime Prevention, which is now called something else. But the idea was that we should take guesswork out of criminality. Most things are apparently measurable. How much money tourists spend in Barbados? People do all kinds of sophisticated calculations and tell you. All kinds of things, as I say. But when it comes to crime, everybody feels that he or she has the answer. And the answer is hang them or beat them or lock them up and throw away the key and so on. And nobody sets back to say, but let us really dig down, drill down now and find out something about the etiology of the crime. What causes the crime? What factors are there at work in the society that may predispose to criminality? So I felt that we should tackle crime at a sophisticated level, or if you like, apply scientific methods to the study of crime, just as they do all over the developed world. You can only do it by carrying out, surveys and so on, and analyses of all kinds of things. So I wanted police response and government's policies to be influenced by evidence-based research, not guesswork. And so that was the task force, and they've done very well since then. As I said, they've called themselves something else now that I can't easily remember, but I think that was set up around 1996, 97, somewhere around there. And then there was the National Council on Substance Abuse. That came out of a conference that we had here that was sponsored by UNDP to try and deal with programs aimed at demand reduction. But there are a number of things. I can't even remember everything that all the major things that I did, but those are a few.
The modesty of the gentleman does not permit him to speak freely about his work, especially as it relates to what he has done for others. He has, however, consented to speaking to us about a number of the projects he worked on as Attorney General. You will note his insistence on speaking about his team, what the team has done to make these projects a success.
The Penal System Reform Act was 1998, yeah. But a number of things happened outside of that. For example, I found myself working on the revision of the Treaty of Chaguaramas. The revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, the way that was done. You remember the original 73 treaty was very narrow, limited in its scope, and they wanted to have a different kind of relationship, now moving towards single market and economy. Beyond the basic free trade area that you had with the 1973 treaty. So we had to revise that basic 73 treaty, and we came up with a revised treaty of Chaguaramas. And the way we did it was that there was a team of officials and experts headed by Nigel Barrow, who was ambassador to CARICOM. And they would, of course, they looked at precedents, Treaty of Rome and so on. And what you had to do was you prepared a chapter or two, and then you called them protocols. And they had to come from Ambassador Barrow's task force to the Legal Affairs Committee, which was the Committee of Attorneys General in the region. And as Attorney General, I was on that. So we had to go through these drafts line by line. And, you know, if we found any inelegant drafting or something that didn't make sense, we would send it back. But ultimately, it was our decision to sign off on those. When they were in a fit and proper state to go to the heads, we would commend them to the heads for their signature at next relevant heads of government meeting or the bureau meeting. So each chapter that has become chapter whatever of the revised treaty, I worked on. I used to know them quite well. Yeah. And that was important work. I wouldn't say it was all that exciting, but it was important work that required care and a careful eye for what you were saying and what you wanted to convey to the public. And then, of course, the CCJ. When I became AG in '94, one of the files that was put on my desk as soon as I went there was a file that contained about a document of no more than about 3 pages. It was an intergovernmental agreement that had been signed by Prime Minister Sandiford, where the heads had agreed to move towards the abolition of appeals to the Privy Council. And that was all it was, just, you know, a kind of policy decision. Well, now we've got to activate that. And both the Barbados Labour Party and the Democratic Labour Party in their 1994 manifestos had committed to abolishing appeals to the Privy Council. So, you know, there was some measure of agreement and consensus between the two parties in Barbados, and I didn't have a problem, and David Thompson was quite understanding and quite reasonable about everything. In December 94, having seen this intergovernmental agreement, I got in touch with CARICOM and asked them if we could put together a meeting of regional AGs to look at how we would move this idea that had been endorsed by the heads to reality. And we had the first meeting here at what was then Grand Barbados. And from there, you know, there was a lot of work done. The heads put me to chair the preparatory committee to plan the development of the Caribbean Court of Justice. So I did that along with my work as Attorney General. And then, of course, when I moved from AG to CJ, they put me as the chair of the high-level task force now to inaugurate the court. And every month, while I was Chief Justice, between 2002 and April 2005, when that court was inaugurated, I think it used to be the last Friday in every month I went to Trinidad to chair meetings, to take little steps to make sure that we were going to make this thing a reality. So I did that along with my judicial work here. So, as I said, those were exciting times because you were creating and building, and you were building institutions that you hope would have a lasting impact regionally. The Americans started a movement, I would call it, to have the countries of the region devolve some of our sovereignty to them in the fight against drugs and so on. And in particular in relation to maritime activities. And they wanted to be able to have their officers board boats in our waters and do as they like and arrest people and so on. I told them not so fast. Now, there was a problem. They were promising, you know, little handouts. So they promised Trinidad and St. Vincent 2 dinghies if we would sign on the dotted line. And they went ahead and signed Pandey and San Mitchell. I refused. I took a paper to cabinet, and in the meantime, P.J. Patterson called me and asked me to speak with his Solicitor General, Patrick Robinson, now a judge in The Hague. And Patrick and I agreed that what the Americans wanted us to do was contrary to international law, and that we could not cede our sovereignty in the manner in which they wanted it done. So we resisted. And it was a bitter experience because when the agreement was being negotiated, former Justice Sherman Moore And the then Solicitor General, Miss Kay Goodrich, who subsequently became a judge, they were negotiating with the American team led by a man called Captain Roach. And he was very offensive. And they came to me after the first day complaining about Roach's behavior. I suspect that he was racist. And I said, oh, leave it to me. The next morning I went down and I blistered him and I used some very strong language. I cannot use it to you. But he understood where I was coming from. And in no time they backed off and they went away. And we did not sign for any 2 dinghies or anything like that was offered. But you know, that was, I think that was the second time that I had had a run-in with the Americans, and I had had to let them know which God they were serving. The other time was, every year they used to give $250,000 US as a training grant through the Ministry of the Attorney General, basically for training of police officers. And one year, I can't remember if it was 96 or 97, you know, there was an editorial written about it in support of me. One year, they sent a note saying that the government of the United States is concerned that Barbados is not doing enough to promote democracy. But you know, I behaved like I made myself. I sent for Roland Bullen, who was the deputy, or what they call the charge d'affaires. Roland was a Grenadian who was working in the embassy. And I called him. And I said to him, Roland, I find this offensive. I want to ask you a question. Tell your government that I asked, why do you think that it is in place for them to tell Barbados about promoting democracy? Well, you all only became democratic in 1964 when black people got certain rights under the Civil Rights Act. So you talking about democracy? Keep the money. I will write on the file now, we do not wish this grant. And I did that. We rejected it. We didn't get the money. And so what? So what? I thought that was a piece of cheek. I think that people did not realize that the Labour Party of that time, the Labour Party government, was different from what people had assumed before the Labour Party to represent. You know, when I fought the shipwrighter thing, and I took the papers to cabinet saying why we are not to sign, Owen was moved to the point where he went to Trinidad to address a meeting at the Hilton. And in talking about our response to shipwrighting, he let go of the famous phrase, "Master, they're done." That's how that happened, yes.
Yet another interesting episode on this autobiographical journey of Sir David Simmons, his life in focus. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for staying with us. See you next week.